the spirit to
Go ahead.
away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like most precious stone, like a jasper, clear as crystal.
All right, so there's a few things that we can learn here. Notice that like the seven angels are still hanging around, right? These seven angels that had the seven bowls of the wrath of God, right? They're the ones that are like, listen, let me show you the bride, right? Let me show you, now that we're done with like the bad stuff, let me show you the positive, right? Let me show you the result of God's judgment and the consequences of judgment on the earth. One thing that I find interesting is that he is taken away in the spirit, and because he's going to see the New Jerusalem coming down, we assume, anyways, that he's kind of being projected into that time period, right? He's being taken to that time when the New Jerusalem shall descend upon that new earth, right? This perfect world. So, one thing that's interesting is the new earth has mountains, right? So it's not just going to be a plain, boring, flat land. We know that there still exists these natural shapes, right? So we know there's no oceans. That's one thing that's different. But one thing that is the same is the idea that there's this great and high mountain, at least one, right? So there's at least one mountain on the earth. And it's from there that he sees the great city, the Holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. And the first characteristic of this building is that it has the glory of God, right? The building itself has the glory of God. Though again, if the building represents God's people, what that means is God's people have the glory of God, right? And that is one of the promises of God, right? That those that will be translated, those that will be taken to heaven, will have, will shine, will have that glory of God upon them. Similar to, for those that read Ellen White, similar to Adam and Eve in the beginning, right? They had that kind of covering, that glory of God upon them. They shone um, like it was clothes, kind of a thing. This bright glory light, like it was clothes. So that's the first thing that we learned. The second one, probably similar to the glory of God, is the fact that they shine, right? That the building shines like this precious stone, like crystal, right? Clear crystal, which is really symbolic for the idea of purity, right? The New Jerusalem, or the Church of God, is so pure that it's see-through, right? There's no blemishes, there's no scars, there's no scuff marks, there's nothing that's negative, right? It's completely pure, completely perfect, that it's like it's clear as crystal, right? Any comments here or questions about these three verses, about this introduction here?
Well, I like the idea that the angels with the seven bowls have shown John this great catastrophe that will occur at the ending of time. And they don't stop there.
Yeah.
They continue because it's so burdensome to see the destruction of all, everything else. And they take John into the New Jerusalem. And what he's actually doing is showing God setting up his kingdom. Mm-hmm. And this kingdom that will never end has a city. And that city is a major city, or the capital city of the New Jerusalem. So this idea is comforting. And the light that shines reminds me of when God created the world. The first thing he said was, let there be light. And so he again sees this marvelous light in the city. And again, it reminds me of when he talked about the light of his face, mm-hmm. and his graciousness in Numbers. He said, when he told Aaron, told Moses, he says, when Aaron prays, let him say this particular prayer, and this is part of it. the light of my face shine upon you and be gracious unto you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it brings all of this for me into this context of God and what he's doing, the blessing and everything in the past, the sin and the destruction and everything is gone.
Yeah.
And this is what we'll see.
Yeah, it's a beautiful transition, right? So we went from like the worst to the perfect, right? To the best. Judy, go ahead.
I'm a little confused here because the earth is destroyed, right? And so this is a new,
The surface of the earth is destroyed, right? Everything that has life on it, kind
okay.
of.
Well,
So
remember,
a new
he's only
Jerusalem.
he's seeing a vision, Judy.
Yeah,
This is in cryptic in symbol form that the angel is showing John.
Yeah,
So he's seeing these things. It's just he's foretelling what is to come.
Yeah,
So
and I understand that, but what my question is here is the whole earth going to be inhabited, or is it going to be a localized city that we're all going to be living in?
This is not that time.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the Bible itself doesn't explain it. Ellen White gets more in. Well, she quotes from the Bible, however. What she basically says is our main home, right? So our center of, or our headquarters will be this New Jerusalem, right? But that there is space outside, right? So people might choose to build a cottage or a home kind of outside, a secondary home. There's going to be places to plant, right? People are going to grow fruits and vegetables. So the Bible does speak about that, right? Planting your vineyards and things like that. And that's where Ellen White takes it from. But it's like Ken said, this becomes like the capital city, right? This becomes the center, not just of the earth, but of the universe, right? Because it's not just a city, it's a city where God lives, right? And because God is there, it changes everything, right? It changes the whole dynamics of the universe because suddenly the earth becomes the center of the universe. But it's a massive city. So I don't know if you remember the children's story. I showed the slides on it. It basically covers all of the United States. So imagine a city the size of a country, right? So it's going to be huge. But because there's no oceans, there's also going to be a lot more land available as well, right? So there's going to be lots of land around this city, around the earth, that can also be inhabited, that can also be used for different things and so on. But it looks like it'll be either forests or valleys or places to plant. Like it's not going to be other cities. You don't get any idea of that either from the Bible or from Ellen White. They seem to be more natural places, kind of like Garden of Eden kind of places. But we don't know, to be honest, right? We're kind of saying as much as we know, but there's still a lot of question marks in terms of just what the new earth is going to look like and be like.
I think Ellen White also presents a scene that when the city comes down, and she says that after the city comes down, then all the wicked dead of the past are resurrected, and Lucifer is loose, and he will coordinate all the wicked forces to take the city that has come down. And she gives some very spectacular, some really mind. She talks about, for example, God will call fire down from heaven, the city will float, the city raises up in the fire, the flames, and so
yeah, so it kind of goes up and down.
See Star Wars.
It's got hydraulics. Lynette, you had it on pause, but I saw you talking. Go ahead.
I have a question. It mentioned here about the leaves, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations.
What verse is that? What verse is that?
It's below verse 2.
But I think that's chapter 22, no?
Yes.
We're on chapter 21. We're not there yet. You're ahead of us.
Sorry.
But we'll get to that. We'll get to that probably next week, actually. Probably next week. But yeah, so the main focus that we're reading here is this New Jerusalem, this massive city, the the capital city of earth, but also the capital city of heaven, because God is going to move in. And yeah, Ken, you mentioned a good point. Like when Moses would go up the mountain and when he came back, his face would be shining. That's what's really happening here with the city. The city shines because it's in the presence of God. It's not its own glory, right? It makes it perfectly clear that the light that's projected from the city and from its people and from everything is because they're in the presence of God, and that presence of God, that glory of God, almost enters our pores, kind of a thing. It becomes part of us, right? So we also shine, which is kind of an amazing thought, right? And it's a beautiful idea in terms of the new dynamics of what it means to be in a society or to be in unity, to be together, right? When we think about togetherness, we maybe think of the church or a family or whatever, or maybe a couple even, right? A husband and wife. But the togetherness that heaven offers is closer than that, right? It literally, like, we physically become attached to God almost, right? Like there's this spiritual connection. There's this togetherness that just doesn't exist here on earth. The closest thing you can get is probably like a husband and wife or a father and son kind of a thing, but it's closer than that. It's the relationship that Jesus had with his Father, right? That they knew each other's steps, they knew each other's thoughts, they were one, just like Jesus says, just as I and my Father are one in heaven, we'll all have that oneness. We'll all share that perfect unity, right? It's something to look forward to for sure. For sure. All right, let's keep going because there's quite a bit about the New Jerusalem. Does someone want to read verses 12 and 13? This is where we start getting some details now. 12 and 13, anyone?
Also, she had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and 12 angels at the gates, and the names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west.
All right. The Revelation loves numbers. Well, the whole Bible loves numbers, right? And so you have this idea of the 12, which is a number that occurs over and over and over again. But 12 always symbolizes God's people, right? So like the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples, there's that very strong connection. And in fact, the 12 gates, right? The 12 gates have the name of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So it's making that direct connection. The reason why this is important, again, so this is the physicalness of it, right? We're seeing it physically. But now if we look at the spiritual meaning behind that, what it means is heaven is only for God's children, right? Or the New Jerusalem is only for God's children. You have to be one of those children to be able to get through one of the gates, right? If you read in the Old Testament, there's where I believe it's Jacob who he talks about all of his kids, right? It's almost like prophetic, right? He kind of gives them this blessing. Each child has a different temperament or a different characteristic, right? Each child is given kind of a different personality. And all of us, every single one of us, if we look through those 12, we'll find who we are, right? So like maybe, I'm a Jacob, or I'm a Judah, or I'm a Levi, or I'm a, based on their characteristics, you'll see where you kind of fit in. And what that's telling us is anyone, it's not that everyone has to think the same way. What you simply have to do is be a child of God, right? So anyone that accepts the salvation and becomes adopted by God. That's how the Bible teaches it, right? We're adopted into the kingship, into God's family. That gives us the right to enter in through our gate, right? Through one of those doors. And the fact that it says, 3 in the north, 3 in the east, south, and west is the idea of this is for everyone in the whole world, right? It doesn't matter where you're coming from, whether you're coming from the north or from the south, east, or west, there's an entrance for you, right? So this is really talking about the idea of inclusivity, like there's a door for you, right? There's a door for every type of person. You just have to make sure that you're a child of God, right? You have to make sure that you're part of God's family to have the right to kind of go through your gate, right? To go through your door. But that's the symbolic meaning. So the literal is just it's a major city that has this huge wall. It's interesting that there's an angel at each gate, right? You kind of get this idea that it's this angel protecting the gate. Protecting from what? I don't know. Maybe it's because, maybe that final battle, so it's just to keep everyone out. But we know in heaven, everything's perfect, right? We know, when sin is gone, the angels don't really need to be there. I don't know if they'll, get fired and get a new job. Or maybe they stay there symbolically. Maybe there's a reason for it. But it's just an interesting little detail that we learned there. Lynette, go ahead.
They're preventing people from jumping over or something.
But remember, everyone's good though, right? Like we're talking about a perfect world, so I don't think you have to worry about people sneaking in or anything like that, unless this is very specific in terms of its timing, like Ken was mentioning, right? The New Jerusalem is going to land on the earth, and that's when Satan is going to try to attack, right? The Bible says that they surround the city of God, right? So perhaps the angels are there because of that specific event.
Okay.
I don't know. Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the 3 gates and each east, north, south, east, and west. And there are 12 tribes of Israel, right?
Yep.
So are we each from like nations, like nationality, tribe, like tribe of
It's
Judah?
not a
tribe of-
nationality. It's more of a personality, right? So it's like the Bible saying there's 12 personalities, and each one of us is going to have one of those personalities, right? One of those traits. But really, what it's really saying is, this is God's home. So this is only for God's children, right? There's actually a verse, I can't remember if we read it already, where it says, it's not for the cowardly or for the evildoers, for the idolaters and things like that. Like there's a restriction at the gates, right? You have to be a converted child of God. It's not just for any Joe Blow to come in, kind of a thing, right? It's part of God's family. You have to be part of God's family to come in. So think of it as spiritual Israel, not literal. So it's not like you have to be literal bloodline of Levi to get through. It's more of a spiritual thing, a spiritual Israelite. That makes sense. Anyone else?
From what I understand in Ellen White's writing is that whatever characteristics that you have had to overcome, like say Peter, he was impulsive, anger. So if you overcame that, that's the gate you'd go through.
That's the one. Yeah.
I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's what I read that somewhere.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm saying, right? So everyone fits into one of those 12, right? It's like your life story or who you are. It's like you're saying. We'll have our gate. We'll have, this door is my door. This is the one that this is what I overcame, or this is, to be able to get into the New Jerusalem, kind of a thing. Yeah. Any other questions or comments in terms of, we haven't even entered the city yet. We're still at the gates, right? Which we know are going to be pearls. But any other questions before we read on? All right, let's keep going. So if you notice, each gate is a name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And now we're going to talk about the foundations, and it's going to be the 12 apostles. So you can see how both are incorporated into the New Jerusalem. So someone want to read verses 14 to 16.
Now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates, and its wall. The city is laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs, its length, breadth, and height are equal.
All right. This is where possibly we're getting a little bit of a hint to something. All right. So you'll know that there's 12 foundations, right? So there's 12 foundations, which have the names of the 12 apostles. And then the city itself is a perfect, here it says it's a square, but that's looking at just the bottom part. It's actually a perfect cube, right? It's a perfect cube. And each line of that cube, right? So if you were to draw a cube, I think I have a picture of it. Yeah, so right here. So if you draw a cube, you'll notice that a cube has 4 lengths, right? 4 lengths, 4 widths, which are these 4 here, and 4 heights, which are these here, all right? So you have a perfect cube, which is made up of 12 lines, right? Lengths, widths, and heights, equaling 12. And how long is each of those lines? 12,000, which if you add it up, or if you multiply, right, which is what we did with the 144,000, is you get this interesting number. You get 144,000. So if you remember back at the beginning there where we talked about, is this a literal number? Is this a symbolic number? Revelation is really pushing towards a symbolic number, because what 144,000 actually represents is the measurements of the New Jerusalem, or the measurements of God's people, everyone that's going to be saved, right? Which is why if you were to go back to the chapter, it talks about, the 144,000, and then he sees this great multitude without number, right? Because the 144,000 is this symbolic number. It represents the New Jerusalem, or the church of God, the people of God. So that's why there's a very strong push towards the 144,000 being a symbolic number, because it represents everyone who's going to be part of this New Jerusalem, right? Everyone that's a part of God's church, right? The bride of Christ. Do you see that multiplication there? Do you see how that's done?
What do you do? What do you do with the part where it says that it's a special group of people that follow God?
Mm-hmm.
They know this song that nobody else knows.
Yeah.
What do you do with that part?
That song, which is actually there's a song mentioned there. It's the song of salvation, right? The song that no angel can sing, that no other being in the universe can sing, is the song of salvation, because we're the only creatures in the universe and for all of eternity who are saved. No one before us and no one after us is ever going to need to be saved. Therefore, the humanity, those that are saved, we have a song, or we have a story. Really, that's what that's saying, right? The song is what we're going to be teaching to people, right? So we have a song or a story that no one else in the universe can say or can sing, not even the angels.
It says it's only the 144,000.
Which is God's people. Again, if you go back to that chapter, a lot of people get confused because a lot of people say the 144,000 is a special group of people who go through the Great Tribulation, right?
Yes,
But
that's what the Bible says.
That's not what the Bible says. Read it again. It says that there's 144,000, and then John looks and sees a great multitude without number wearing white vests or white robes. And then an angel comes and asks him, who are these people in white robes? So we know we're not talking specifically about the 144,000. We're talking about this great multitude without number. And it's then that it says, these are the ones who go through the Great Tribulation. All right. So the ones that go through the Great Tribulation are everyone that's going to be saved. It's the great multitude without number. For some reason, and this is a lot of Adventists, they confused the two groups, which, to be honest, isn't two groups. It's the same group. One is simply being mentioned symbolically as 144,000. And the second one is actually giving us the real number, which isn't given. It's just a great multitude without number. But we're looking at actually the same group of people. The Great Tribulation is this world, is sin. All of us are going through the Great Tribulation. All of us are struggling to be victorious in this sinful world. If you go back to the chapter and you'll see it. Look at exactly where it says that, these are the ones that go through the Great Tribulation. Look at who is actually being spoken of there. It's very clear that it's the great multitude without number. Everyone that's going to be saved. Louise, go ahead.
So I have the Living Bible here that says that when he measured it, he found it was square as wide as it was long. In fact, it was the form of a cube, for its height was exactly the same as its other dimensions, 1,500 miles each way. Then he measured the thickness of the walls, and he found them 216 feet across. The angel called out these measurements to me using standard units, which means 144,000.
Yes. And here's the interesting part. And this is why I'm saying this number isn't here by accident. It's not by accident that it's 12 lines and it's 12,000 furlongs long. Because when he measures the walls of the city, right, it's 12,000 furlongs. He's using a very specific measurement, furlongs, right? Which in your Bible, Louise, they translate that into meters or miles or whatever it is, right? But it's interesting that he uses furlongs here. But when we jump ahead to verse 17, where he's measuring the thickness, which is what you read, Louise, look at what it says here. Then he measured its wall, 144 cubits, right? He could have used furlongs, but that wouldn't give him that 144, which he wants to give us. All right. So this is twice when we're talking about the New Jerusalem that this idea of the 144, and in the other case, 1,000, pops up. That's not an accident, right? There's a reason why God wants to give us these measurements, because he's trying to make that connection, that this New Jerusalem represents God's people, who symbolically are given this number of 144,000. All right. So let me just read verses 17 and 18 here since we're here. Then he measured its wall 144 cubits according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel, which is kind of an interesting statement. The construction of its wall was of jasper, and the city was pure gold like clear glass. And for the second time, we're getting this very strong message of purity, right? First, it was like clear crystal, right? When John was kind of far away from it. But now that he's right up close, it's clear like glass, even though it's made out of pure gold, right? Which is kind of interesting. I guess if you purify gold enough, it becomes see-through. I don't know. But that's the imagery that we're getting here. Any questions about this so far? We still haven't actually got into the city yet. We're still looking at the walls. And it's amazing how thick they are, right? Like these are massive, massive walls. which again, you might ask the question, why does a sinless world need walls, right? But they're here, right? And one thing that's interesting is they're very thick, yet we can see right through them, right? So someone can be on the other side of the wall and you can say hi and they can see you and probably read your lips, and you can have a conversation going back and forth. So it's kind of an interesting, unique city, right? There's no city that we know of on this earth that's even close to something like this.
Well, there's a question I have to ask. Is this city maybe the church for us, where we all come together?
Well, if you
That's the
remember,
question.
it says, the Bible says that there's no temple in the city, because God himself is the temple. In a way, yes. I mean, the whole thing is the temple of God, right? Because we're going to be worshiping God continuously, right? So in that respect, yeah, wherever we are, though, I think is going to be like the temple of God, because we're always in his presence, kind of a thing. But I guess because there's going to be so many people, there isn't going to be like a small temple inside the city. God needs the whole space, right, to be able to worship with us together, right? All of us, not little groups, kind of a thing. No small groups in heaven. It's one big group in heaven. Anyone else? Any questions or comments?
I guess the walls of themselves have these precious stones, and it reminds me of the temple that Moses built.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all overlaid with gold, and it reflects in those days the Shekinah glory. And so God's glory is reflected in the New Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no need for temple because we abide in him. He becomes our temple. The Bible says God is light,
Yeah.
and we will be in his presence. It says that, it's like we abide in him. There's a section in the Bible that says we live and move and we have our being within him. And so it'll be beyond what my mind can really comprehend, but just some things I'm able to grasp as I think about it.
Yeah, and comparing it to the temple, what the beautiful idea of it is, if you read, for instance, Solomon's temple, the walls, they would carve images of angels, right? So there was images of angels and fruit and things like that. And then, of course, on the Ark of the Covenant, with the mercy seat, we have those two covering angels, right? What's beautiful here is, in this New Jerusalem, they're not carvings, right? They're not even statues. These are angels everywhere, right? God is always surrounded by angels. It's like we become a living temple, right? It's like we are the temple of God because we're surrounding God in that way. Again, it's very much this idea of connection, right? This idea that there's nothing that divides us. There's nothing that separates us. The Bible over and over again has this idea that God has to hide his face from us, right? He has to put this veil, or he has to hide inside the most holy place. In heaven, there's no hiding. There's
Well,
no.
it does say that our bodies are the temple of God.
Yeah. And in this New Jerusalem, that's kind of literal, right? We are kind of part of his home, right? We're sounds weird, but like we're the decorations, we're those carvings, we're those beautiful things that made it shine, right? Like those precious jewels that Ken was talking about. Except it shines because God is shining, and that shining is reflecting off of us, and it creates this beautiful scene, right? This, again, we can't even imagine it. It's just this otherworldly, perfect, harmonious, loving scene, right? You can try to imagine it, but you're gonna fall short. You're always gonna fall short.
Reminds me when he told Moses on the mount, he says, you can't see my face and live.
Yeah.
But in this case, as it's said in 1 John chapter 3, he says, we shall see him as he is because we will be like him.
Yeah.
So whatever glory he has is shared with all his children. And we become like him. We can see him, we can behold him, not be destroyed, because somehow he shares his divine nature with us. We're like him.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And that's why I like verse 17. This idea is going to come up. I can't remember if we've read it already. I think we have. But in verse 17, where it goes like this, according to the measure of a man, that is of an angel. And that's done on purpose. That's saying, that difference that right now exists, right? We know right now the angels are above us, right? There's the angels, which are perfect and all of these things. And then we have fallen humanity down here. In the New Jerusalem, there's this equality, right? For instance, we read this, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but where John falls before the angel, right, and wants to worship him. And the angel's like, no. I'm your fellow brother now, right? I'm not greater than you. Worship God kind of a thing. And so it's this elevation of humanity, right? It's this, yes, you were down here, but I'm gonna elevate you up to the same level as the angels, right? As those that live with God, because we're gonna live with God, right? And so I really like that idea that, this verse just gives us that little hint that, man and angel are finally one day gonna be seen as equals, right? As brothers in that sense.
That's because we won't have any sin.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. The only thing that's a little bit disappointing from what Ellen White says is when we do get resurrected, at the beginning we keep our original height, right? So I'm still going to be really short. Everyone's gonna be towering above me for a while there. But then the heights
I must
equal
remind
out,
you, we
right?
will grow up.
Yeah. They say
We
that
will
after a
grow
while
up.
you grow up.
So you're not going to stay the same.
Yeah, one day I won't have to be on people's shoulders to see God, right? I'll be able to see
We
him
will grow up.
on my
We'll
own
grow
feet.
up.
But that's what we're talking about here. Because there's no sin, we're going to be elevated to that same level, right? All right, let's keep going. Someone want to read? Someone that really likes to say words here. 19 to 21. There's a lot of jewels to talk about, so someone that likes these words.
I'll try. The
Go ahead,
foundations
Judy.
the foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony.
Chalcedony.
Thank you.
Chalcedony.
The fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th
Price of praise.
Price of praise.
the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each individual gate was of one pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass.
All right.
Mhm.
I'll tell you what I like most about this. It's not the golden streets. It's not anything like that. I love the fact that this city is going to be so colorful, right? Usually when we see images, it's, just beige or white or whatever, or gold. But that's not what we're reading here, right? What we're reading about is just all different kinds of colors and just kind of, like when you look at a garden, right? And there's all these different colored flowers. That's how I picture the New Jerusalem. It's not going to be boring. It's not going to be monotone. It's not going to be, it's going to be just alive with colors and just shining and happy, right? Like it gives me the sense of just joyfulness and playfulness. And, it's not a place, for instance, when you enter a Catholic church, or a cathedral. It's beautiful, right? It's full of paintings and things like that. But when you enter it, you get this feeling of like, oh, like you have to be quiet, like you have to, like it's like a heavy presence. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Heaven, I
that's
see
true.
heaven, I see completely different, right? Because of these colors, because of all of this that's going on. When I think about heaven, I think about a place that's noisy, right? That's like you hear singing and laughing and just joy and kids running around, and like that's the kind of image that I see when I read these verses here. It's not going to be a place where, oh, you got to be quiet, you got to be. No, this is a place of joy, of celebration, of singing, and Adventists don't like it, but dancing, and just that joyfulness, right? That aliveness, that what heaven is, right? Heaven is about life. But maybe I'm reading into it. Maybe that's just my own fantasy. But that's what I see when I read these verses here. What do you see? What's your thoughts on?
I'm just wondering if those gems are the same gems that were on the front of the priest's robe.
Very possible, right? We know that, for those that don't know, right? So there was a high priest who wore his robes, and then there was this plaque, this square plaque that had 12 stones, each stone representing a tribe of Israel. They could be, here's the issue, because when it talks about that breastplate, we're talking very old time in history and Hebrew. In Greek, in the New Testament with Revelation, now we're talking Greek, and it's a lot more recent. And when it comes to naming stones, some names of stones change, right? Some names of stone might be different. So you might even get a different set of 12, but that doesn't mean that it's actually not the same 12, if that makes any sense. All right, just because of name changes between the two languages, and even between the two, we're probably talking about 1,000, almost 2,000 year difference between when Exodus, for instance, was written and Revelation. But quite possibly the same stones, yeah.
Never heard of a stone called chrysoprase.
Chrysoprase, right?
Praise, yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
I
don't
think
know.
of beauty. I just think of glitter and
Yeah,
glitz,
yeah. You think of like the lights, like just dancing
Neon
around.
lights, yes,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the Northern Lights. I don't know if anybody have ever seen that, but that's what I picture.
Yeah,
right?
even just that glory of, because here's the thing, everything is glowing, right? The
Yeah.
walls shine, the buildings shine, the floor shines, the people are shining. So it's just
Yeah.
you're gonna have to have sunglasses in heaven, I think, just to be able to see, because everything, and that's without looking at the fact that God is there, who is super bright. He's brighter than the sun, kind of a thing.
Mm.
And so it's gonna be a bright place, definitely, definitely.
Probably need sunglasses.
Yeah, we'll have to.
No, you'll have perfect eyesight.
Perfect eyesight. Yeah, we'll have to adjust to it. Any other thoughts in terms of these verses here before we go on?
I think the light of itself may be these stones will, as I said, they will, it's like, for example, white light is made up of several different lights.
Yeah, yeah.
And when it's combined, we see it in a different way. I think God's glory will be so expressed by the beauty of these different stones. It'll be amazing just to be there in His presence.
Yeah.
As we are bathed in the glory of this light.
Yeah.
That He is. It's hard to explain some things, but it'll be quite
a show. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
But and here's the crazy part though, as beautiful as the New Jerusalem is, right? All of those gems and colors and all of that, it still pales at looking at God. You know, we don't understand this yet, but when we get to heaven and we're standing in the presence of God, He's gonna be the kind of presence that you're gonna forget that you're looking at Him. You're just gonna be staring at Him, like it's just you can't help it, kind of a thing, right? And I think it'll even be a little bit hard, even just to look away, right? Because He is perfect. You know, God is, and remember, God creates us with that need for Him, right? So, like that emptiness that we feel in this world, and I think all of us feel it at some point, right? That emptiness that we feel, that's because we were designed to be close to God, right? We were
Yeah.
designed to be in the presence of God. And so when we finally get there, and when we're finally kind of before God, you're going to feel something that you've never felt before. You're finally going to feel like I'm whole. Like this is where I belong. This is where I'm happiest. You know, this is where I'm complete. And you're not going to want to leave God's presence, period, for eternity. It sounds crazy, but that's what heaven is going to be like. You're going to love just being close to God and just looking at Him, right? There will be nothing in the universe that will give you more joy than that. And that's heaven. That's what heaven's going to be like, right? For the world, it's crazy, right? Like, why would I want to look at someone for eternity, kind of a thing, right? But until you experience it, until we're there and we see it, it doesn't make sense to us, right? It's hard to grasp that notion.
It reminds me of having this idea when Jesus says He's the light of the world.
Mhm.
And if you walk in the light, there'll be no darkness at all.
Mm-hmm.
And here now, all the darkness is gone because we're constantly in the light.
Yeah.
And that obedience that He requires, we will always respond because we're now living in His light.
Yeah.
And I think the marvel of that, together with the experience that we have gone through in the world with evil and wickedness and hurts and tears and so on, it's no more.
Yeah.
And it'll be quite something to be in as we experience something new, this newness of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're so used to consequences here on this world, right? Even when it's something good, we know it's not going to last. We know that there's something behind it. We know that, you know, like take marriage, for instance, right? You love this person and you truly love them, but you know you're going to have bad days. You know you're going to have arguments. You know there's going to be friction because that's how this world is designed. In heaven, it's not like that. It's every relationship is perfect. You don't have to be afraid that the person's not going to be who they say they are. You don't have to be afraid or disappointed or hurt or, you know, it's perfection, right? It's what keeps us going. It's what wakes us up in the morning and says, no, I'm gonna stick with God because what He has for me, there's nothing in this world that compares to that. What am I going to give up? What am I going to give God up for in this world? There's nothing, right? Once you realize what God is offering, there's nothing in this world that even comes close to wanting a person, you know, I'm going to give up God for this or whatever. No, that just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. All right, let's keep going. Let's see what else we have here. So now we're going to talk about the temple. We've spoken about this a few times. Does someone want to read verses 22 to 24?
But I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. And the city had no need of the sun or of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illumined it, and the Lamb is its light. And the nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light, and the kings of the earth bring their glory and honor into it.
All right. So we spoke about the idea, right? There's no temple because God is the temple, right? Like you're never not going to be with God, kind of a thing, right? And so you're always at church, kind of a thing. You're always in the presence of God. If you remember, right, go reading back where it talks about, those that are saved, they're going to be just following Jesus around, right? It's going to be like Jesus's groupies. We're just going to always be kind of huddled around them. And it's funny because I've seen secular people kind of read these verses and they're like, oh wow, if that's what heaven's going to be like, then forget it. Why am I going to just walk around behind a guy for eternity? I want to do my own thing, right? It's people that don't understand that's not a negative. This is the greatest privilege in the world, kind of a thing. Like God is allowing us, Jesus is allowing us to be the closest to him, right? I imagine like the other beings almost being jealous, like, oh man, I wish I could be part of that group, right? And the reason, by the way, and this goes back to that song that no one else can sing, we're going to have a connection to Christ that no other being has, right? Like every other being was born already connected to God and to Jesus and so on. We were born disconnected with God. And it's through the sacrifice of Jesus that we can have the ability to reconnect with him, right? To actually be connected to him. We're the only beings in the universe that are going to have that experience, right? We're going to have this special, unique relationship with Christ that no other being has. That's why we're close to Jesus, right? It's our story, it's our history. A good example is, and this is like documented, soldiers, right? When soldiers go to war and they fight beside each other, when they come back, there's this brotherhood, there's this connection that exists between them, even if they hated each other beforehand, right? They could have been, bickering at each other and I hate this guy. But once you go to war together and you come back, because of the shared experience, there's this connection there, right? And that's what we're going to have with Christ. We went to war together with him, that no one else has experienced. And it's that experience, that joint experience, that's going to create a special bond between us and God that no other creature has. All right? That's really what we're seeing here, is the specialness of, again, this idea of, we walk in its light, we walk in the light of God, which is the Lamb, right? We walk in the light of Jesus. And that's our purpose. That's our joy. That's what wakes us up in the morning when we're in heaven, right? That's what it is. It's, man, I get to spend another day with them. I get to spend another day with them. And you're never going to get bored. You'll never get tired of doing that. That's what we have to look forward to. Any thoughts? Anything that you found interesting here in these verses? There's quite a few things, so feel free.
Yeah. One of the things that I find interesting.
Okay, Ken first, and then Judy. Go ahead, Ken.
So one of the things I like is the verse 23rd verse that we read. It talks about God's glory will be in the temple, but the light of his glory is the Lamb. To me, that's something very special.
Yeah.
And we don't know what it's going to be like, but I think it's going to be really awesome. But Ellen White paints a picture of the saints when the world is redeemed, that it will not be boring. We will have the opportunity to tour the entire universe. And as she puts it, she says, there's no other creature that knows the joy that salvation brings than human beings who have been redeemed. And she says, wherever we go in the universe, the people who will be called our brethren will put us somewhere to tell them the joy salvation brings. And she says, even the angels will fold their wings because they never experienced the joy that salvation brings. And so human beings, because of all they went through in sin and redemption, is placed in a unique position to remind the universe of God's love.
Yeah.
And wherever we go, there's nothing in our hearts but an expression of his love and his goodness. And I think human beings will be the only creatures that look like God, because Jesus took our form and our image.
Yeah.
And it's the only creatures who will have experienced, like God, good and evil, nobody else in the universe, and have this experience of rearing children, that like a father that God is, who created the entire universe. So there's so many things that are special that God has given us to experience, that this is my belief, that when the Bible says sin shall not rise a second time, I believe because of the joy and the reminding of the universe of what we went through, whenever they see us, they can only think of what God has done for these creatures. And nobody, I believe, will want to go back through anything of that nature, to sin and to disobey God.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think about like the scars that Jesus is going to keep, right? As that memorial, as that symbol. Because I mean, think about it. Think about every time God is going to create a new world, right? Every time maybe Jesus follows the same pattern. He's going to go down there and shape them and create the humans of that world. The first thing they're going to see is those scars, right? And they're going to ask the question, where did that come from? You know, what happened? And that's where our song comes in, right? That's where our testimony and you know, just highlighting the love of God, you know, and the mistake of sin and so on. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful idea. Notice that it says that it doesn't say that there isn't a sun or a moon. It just means that, listen, God is going to be so bright already that the sun isn't going to help any, right? It's like being in a bright room and lighting a candle. It doesn't make a difference, right? So there probably is still a sun and a moon. It's not needed. You know, there's no more night in the New Jerusalem, because God never turns off, right? The Lamb never turns off. So it's light day and night. It's the city that never sleeps, literally.
Okay,
You know?
it's
Louise.
Judy's turn. It was Judy's turn first, and I'll
Oh,
come.
yes, that's right. Judy, go ahead.
I just wanted to know who the kings of the earth were.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I was going to ask that question too.
Yeah. That is a very good question. Now, we know we're going to be princes, right?
Yeah.
Of God. So the kings of the earth, maybe they're still kings. I have no idea. The kings of the earth bring their glory and honor into it. Because as far as I know, there's one king, right? And that's Jesus. But maybe I have no idea. That's one question that I honestly I can't give a good answer to.
Maybe there were good kings.
Yeah, maybe David still is considered a king, right? And the other ones.
I don't know if it's those if it's those kings. However, there's a thought that I think it might be, again, Ellen White, that talks about that all that God has, God will love us just as he loves his son.
Mm-hmm.
And we are brethren with Christ. And everything that Christ, the Father, has given to him belongs to us.
Yeah. So
in that sense, I don't know if that's a reference to kings will bring their glory, but all of us will in some special way glorify God.
Yeah.
As we live and move throughout the universe.
I mean, Revelation does say that we reign with Christ, right? So there is this sense of kingship there, right? Again, I would have guessed, or if I would have written this kind of a thing, I probably would have put the princes of the earth, right? That one I think would make a lot more sense in our minds. But it's the word kings, and we know it's accurate. So
Yeah, but it's
there's
also
some
bring
sort
their glory, you know?
Yeah,
God's
yeah.
glory is there, so,
Yeah. But again, well, think about it. But we give glory to God, right? Our glory is cheap,
or
but we
or
still
the
give
worship,
it, right?
the
We
worship,
still
the
give it.
worship glory.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what the
Okay,
Bible says. We
that's
were
all right.
created for his glory.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I was
But it's a good
thinking of the
question.
glory. I was thinking of the brilliance, the glory, but then the glory of worship. That's a different way. Okay.
Here's the good news. Once we get to heaven, we just ask, listen, God, what does this verse here mean? Who are these kings that you're talking about here? Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, well, here it says in the Living Bible, it says the rulers of the world will come and bring their glory to
See,
it.
the rulers of the world. See, that one can make a little bit more sense, right? Okay, I mean, here's the thing too. It's possible that there'll still be some sort of hierarchies. We know with Moses, for instance, right? There was Moses, and then there was, the judges, and then the judges had those under them, and then those. I don't know why there would be hierarchy. Though we do, even within the angels, there seems to be hierarchy, right? We know God loves order, so that's one thing. The good news is, even if there is some sort of hierarchy in heaven, even if there is, maybe there's going to be continents or something, I have no idea, and God will put a king representative on each continent. It won't be like an earthly version of it where, they're there just to step on our necks and stuff. We know it's going to be perfect and holy, right? So it's nothing to be scared of. But it's an interesting little thing there. Louise, go ahead.
No, but that wasn't the theme I was getting at. I was getting at the city had no sun and no moon that shine, right? But we're talking about the city, and then we have walls that you can see through.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
the city will be lighted up, but maybe outside that's my thought.
Maybe outside
have
of the
the
city,
moon and the
it'll
sun.
get dark. Possibly.
There will be
So-
no night. There will be no night.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, because, I think the city might be only for special purposes of worshiping, but we live outside because you will have your own place to plant, as Ellen White suggested, and do things with the soil that maybe Cain did.
Plant a vineyard.
Yeah, we don't know what we'll
Mango
do,
trees.
but there we'll be very active.
Yeah.
And maybe we go on Sabbath into the city to worship or something of this nature. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we're not going to be just in the city to the rest of our life. We'll be out to the universe, outside, and looking at the beautiful things that God has created. And we see the image of God in his creation, the beauty, his wisdom, his love. So we'll never come to an end to say, as Ellen White puts it, to say, we know everything about God.
I've seen it all. I've seen it all.
learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll never say that we know it all. She says, all through eternity we'll be learning, whether we visit planets or we're planting or we're in the city, we will only be exposed to God's glory and his love and his goodness. And notice it says, as Ellen White puts it, I think in early writings or Great Controversy, she says, God's love stopped flowing because of sin on the earth. But when it comes to the end and man is redeemed, love will again flow throughout the universe.
Yeah.
And so with love flowing throughout the universe, there'll be no more problems as we had before, whether it was from having this hierarchy or so on, that would make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that we always have to remember is Paul makes it very clear, no eye has seen, no ear has heard what the glories of heaven is actually going to be like, right? So what John is seeing here is a picture from God as much as God can show, right? It's going to be a lot more than this, right? This is just a very simple, think of this almost like a cartoon drawing compared to what it's actually going to be like, right? Because if John was to see the true image of heaven, well, one, he would probably die because he's still a sinner, kind of a thing, right? But two, he couldn't explain it. He couldn't write it down. It's unwritable, right? So this is just a glimpse, right? This is looking through that a stained glass window, kind of a thing. The main idea, though, is it's pure, it's perfect, it's holy, and it's where you want to be. Like there's not going to be anything that you're going to be regretful for or let down by. Everything in heaven is going to surpass all of our wildest dreams. That's the key. That's really what what we're reading here. It's don't be afraid. It's worth it, right? Everything that you're going to get is worth it. All right, let's keep going. Let's see what else we can learn here. Verses 25 to 27. Does someone want to read this?
Its
Its
gates
gate
shall
shall-
not,
Go ahead, Judy, go again.
its gates shall not be shut at all by day, and there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it. But there shall be by no means enter it anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life.
All right, and this is the key, all right? The gates don't shut, right? It's almost there symbolically, right? To basically say this is only for holy people, even though there is only holy people left. But that's the point, right? There's never a need to, we have to shut the doors because of whatever the scary things outside. No, they don't close. It's there. You're protected no matter what, kind of a thing. And that's where it talks about that there is no more night, right? So now again, is that only talking about the New Jerusalem, or is that talking about the whole world? The context here seems to be the New Jerusalem. Though you would think if God is on the planet, it's probably bright all over, right? It probably circles the earth, his glory, right? So I would assume that even though this is talking about the New Jerusalem, I would guess anyways that there's no night anywhere on the earth, just because God is there, right? And they shall bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it.
There, yeah. What does that mean, Pastor? And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations.
Yeah, for me, it's talking about us, right?
That's
Like,
what
the little glory that we have, right? The little bit that we can still offer, we're still going to offer it, right? Even though the glory of God overshadows it and it's, kind of meaningless, but we can't help it. Everyone is going to be sharing the glory, right? Everyone's going to be not focused on receiving, but on giving, right? Which is interesting because then you go to someone like Lucifer, right? That was the big change, right? Before Lucifer, every being was all about, sharing their glory, or about giving. And for some reason, Lucifer got it stuck in his head there about, okay, now I want to receive, right? Now I want, right? And then he wants a throne and power and that kind of thinking doesn't exist in heaven. Isn't going to exist in heaven, right? In the New Jerusalem, and that's why we get verse 27 right after that, right? In verse 27, any other type of thinking isn't gonna be allowed in, right? There is no abomination or lie or anything that defiles. It's not about gaining anymore. It's going to be all about giving. It's going to be all about sharing and helping and that kind of a direction. And then it ends with the book of life, right? The Lamb's book of life, which is, that's everything. I mean, it's crazy to think about, but everybody's future is dependent on this book, right? Like this is the only book that matters in the universe. Making sure your name is in this book. If your name's in that book, everything that we've read until now is yours. If your name's not in the book, you lose out on everything, right? This is the big choice. This is that big decision that every single one of us has to make individually. Do I want my name in that book and what that means? Or do I want to be left out? Right? That's the decision. That's the choice we all have to make. Any questions, comments on this?
There was, it might have been 10, 11, 12 of Luke, where Jesus gave them the power of demons, to cast out demons. And so they came back and they told Jesus how they had the power and they cast out demons and so on. And he told them, don't be so taken up with the fact that you casted out demons. What you should be really concerned about is that your names are written in heaven.
Yeah.
So not the power you had over the demons, but be more concerned that your names are written in the book in heaven. And I think this reminds me. And the other thing in verse 26 is that any glory and honor that we bring into that the nations bring, it's only a reflection of the honor and glory of God.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that we bring that say that we've developed on our own. It is only a reflection of what God has done for us that we bring into the kingdom.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's like the verse that says, all the goodness in us is really the Holy Spirit, right? It's really the Holy Spirit working in us to do those things. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts on this? This is the last verse of chapter 21. Next week we'll go into.
So it's a beautiful picture in this chapter that John paints, and it really is a delightful chapter. And in spite of all the difficulties that we pass by, he's bringing us to a conclusion that we keep in mind. No wonder when we look at the first chapter of the book of Revelation, it says, "Blessed are those who read, hear, and keep those things in mind, for the end is near." So the things we read and the joy we get out of it, we keep these in mind to remind us that in spite of the difficulties we pass through, that there's an end, and God has opened to us, even though our human minds cannot conceive the things, yet they're marvel to us as we look at them today.
Well, one thing that's interesting too is when and we've talked about this, right? This full circle effect in the Bible. When you go to the beginning of the Bible, it only takes 2 chapters, right? By the 3rd chapter, we already have the fall, right? So we have these 2 perfect chapters, where the world is perfect. And then in the 3rd chapter is the fall, right? Everything goes bad. In Revelation, you see the same thing, right? So the last 2 chapters, perfect, right? Like we've learned about the New Jerusalem. Next week, we're going to learn about the tree of life. And Lynette, that's when we'll bring in the leaves of healing. And you can see how it's in reverse, right? So the last 2 chapters are great. But even just the 3rd chapter in, the last remnants of sin, right? So in Genesis, it starts high and then dips down. But then when you get to Revelation, you get to the 3rd one, and then it goes up, right? And you get these last 2 perfect chapters. And it's not by accident, right? It's not by accident that in the last chapter of the Bible, we're taken back to the tree of life, right? Which is that main symbol there in the creation story. And it's God's way of saying, listen, I know you're suffering. I know you're in a sinful world. I know you're in pain. I know life is tough. And sometimes you really have to struggle. But if you stay strong, this is just a dip in the road, right? This is just, we're in the dip right now, but You just stay strong, and we'll be out of it soon, and you'll be back to where you really belong, right? Back to that perfect world, back to that Eden. And that's the hope, right? That's why we're here today. That's why we go to church. That's why we study our Bibles. We have to believe in this. Don't think of this as just fairy tales or stories or whatever. Sometimes it's tough, I'll be honest. There's some times where I'm just outside and I look up into the sky and I say, it just seems so unimaginable that one day we're going to see Jesus up there. It could seem so impossible in the moment, right? But we have to believe that, no, Jesus is up there. He's in heaven right now, but one day you're going to look up and we're going to see him. And everything changes in that moment. That one day you look up, it's going to hit you. It's just going to be like, it's done, right? I'm not going to have to spend one more day on this planet. Everything after this is perfect. After this, no more sin, no more temptation. All the things that I've hoped for, they just came true. Just that first moment that you look up to heaven and you see that, everything's going to change. No more quarantining, Louise, in your house there. You won't have to do that anymore.
What a beautiful day that will be.
You'll be
Oh,
free.
remember.
You'll be able to walk outside.
Yeah.
Not have to have any more worries, right? Not have to worry about tomorrow or worry about, everything changes in that day. But we have to make sure we're on the right side, right? We have to
And
make
we'll
sure
all
that,
meet each other in person.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Uh,
And this is where,
Waiting
praying for family members, praying for loved ones, praying for, friends and that. And I know, man, the number one prayer I get from people is, pray for my son, pray for my daughter, pray for my kids. But I always tell people, man, just look at the thief on the cross. I can guarantee you that his family, his parents were probably like, we lost him. But he just needed that one moment with Jesus. He just needed that last moment of his life with Jesus, and he's saved. He's one of the few people in the Bible that we're guaranteed we'll see in heaven, right? And for me, I always just say, you know what? Just trust in God's love. Realize that God loves your kids more than you love them. And he's going to do everything to save them. Even if it takes that last moment of their life, God will use that opportunity. But that doesn't keep us from praying. That doesn't keep us from doing our best to try to, have them make the right decision. Because it's this one book, having your name in the Lamb's Book of Life. This is the only thing that matters on earth. It's not taxes. It's not your home. It's not even your health, to be honest. Your health here on earth, you could be healthy, but we all die, right? The healthy person dies, the sick person dies. But if your name's in that book, there's no second death, right? There's no eternal death. So this has to be the focus of our life,
You mentioned the first 3 chapters of the book of Genesis. For me, understanding or setting the stage of the book of Revelation, I look at the first 3 chapters in the book of Genesis, and it tells me that God is a patient and loving God, because even though he warned Adam and Eve, he could have destroyed them.
Yeah.
But for over, as Ellen White has, 6,000 years, he continues to work patiently with humankind.
Yeah.
And the book of Job reveals who God is like, what God is like, because he's not the destroyer. There's a destroyer. But why God, in his marvelous wisdom, allows the difficulties to come, we don't fully understand, but we can only trust him because he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And so looking at the 3 chapters of Genesis, first 3 chapters of Job, gives me a better picture of how I approach the book of Revelation. And it fits in with the book of Job and the book of Revelation, those first few chapters, because to me, the book of Revelation is a revelation about who God is like and what he's like, what he's doing in his wisdom in saving sinful humankind.
Yeah,
That is what
absolutely.
it brings to my mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else? Any final thoughts before we transition over to the prayer? Let me turn this off so we can see everybody. There we go. Okay, well, if there's no other comments, then let me stop recording.